The night of August 20th, 1989, crept over Beverly Hills like any other warm summer evening, calm, quiet, and deceptively peaceful. But behind the wrought iron gates of a palatial 23-room mansion on Elm Drive, a nightmare was about to unfold. The $4 million estate, once graced by music royalty like Prince and Elton John, now belonged to Jose and Kitty Menendez, a wealthy, high-profile couple enjoying what should have been just another tranquil evening at home. A James Bond film flickered on the VCR screen as they lounged on the couch, unaware that their final moments were ticking away. The mansion, a place of power, prestige, and luxury, was unusually still. Outside, on the darkened street, a teenage girl waited for her boyfriend, unaware that she was about to become an accidental witness to history. Around 10 p.m., a car pulled up to the curb. Two young men stepped out. One moved toward the trunk, the other walked purposefully toward the house. The girl, puzzled but unconcerned, turned away, and in that brief moment, the countdown to one of America's most shocking crimes had begun. Strangely, the usually secure estate was wide open that night. No alarm, no locked gates. It was as if someone had been expecting company. I'm Brian Emmendorfer, and you're listening to Lost Bones. In this episode, we unravel the cold-blooded crime that turned the Menendez name into a national scandal. A story of wealth, deception, and two sons whose actions would forever haunt the American conscience. At exactly 11:47 p.m., a frantic 911 call shattered the silence. A young man's trembling voice told dispatchers his parents had been shot, brutally murdered. Officers Michael Butkus and John Chernotsky arrived at the sprawling home, only to be met by a chilling sight. Two young men sprinting from the front door, collapsing in anguish on the front lawn. The younger one bolted toward a tree, hysterical. The older tried to contain him but looked equally stunned. It was chaos, raw, unfiltered panic. Inside the house, officers discovered a blood-soaked scene. Jose and Kitty Menendez were lying lifeless in the living room. The sheer brutality suggested a deliberate, merciless execution.
Oh.
But strangely, nothing had been taken. There were no broken locks, no shattered glass, no signs of forced entry at all. Veteran investigator Les Zoller was called in. Calm and methodical, he surveyed the crime scene and immediately sensed something was off. The room had been disturbed, but not by a struggle. It looked staged, as if someone wanted it to look like a break-in. Hadn't done their homework. His theory: this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was personal. The two young men who had stumbled out of the house in shock. They were the victim's sons, 21-year-old Lyle and 19-year-old Erik Menendez, brought in for questioning. The brothers gave eerily different impressions. Erik was inconsolable, barely able to form sentences. Lyle, however, spoke with surprising composure. He laid out their day in detail. Tennis in the morning, movie plan that changed last minute, a trip to a Santa Monica food festival. But investigators weren't convinced. The story was just beginning to crack, and what would come next would grip the nation for years to come. Asterisk. After deciding to attend the Taste of LA festival, Lyle and Erik Menendez realized they didn't know how to get there. They phoned a friend, Perry Berman, who was already at the event. The three agreed to meet at the Cheesecake Factory in Beverly Hills. But before heading out, Erik remembered something crucial. He had forgotten his fake ID, so the brothers turned back home when they arrived. Something didn't feel right. A strange haze hung in the air of the lavish living room. Smoke, not thick, but noticeable, unsettling in a house where nothing was ever out of place. According to Lyle, his first thought was his mother. Kitty had been showing signs of emotional distress in recent weeks. Erratic behavior, sudden mood swings. He wondered, had something happened to her? Had she done something to herself? Sergeant Thomas Edmonds sat quietly, listening to their account. Erik later confirmed the story through tears, still visibly shaken. But something about the details or lack of them didn't sit right. When asked whether they knew anyone who would want their parents dead, Lyle hesitated, then offered a startling suggestion. Maybe the mafia was involved at that point. Despite inconsistencies and bizarre behavior, investigators did not treat the brothers as suspects. Crucial forensic tests like gunshot residue were never conducted. In Beverly Hills at the time, such procedures weren't standard unless specifically requested by the lead detective. In the Menendez case, that request never came. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. Crime scene experts combed the home while over at the LA County Medical Examiner's office. Dr. Irwin Golden began what would be one of the most disturbing autopsies of his career. Jose Menendez had been executed with a 12-gauge shotgun. One blast to the back of the head left a wound large enough to fit a grown man's fist. Damage was catastrophic, his brain virtually obliterated. But that wasn't the only shot. Wounds riddled his body: the right shoulder, forearm, left knee, and elbow. The injury to the elbow caught the coroner's eye. He believed Jose had still been moving when the first shots were fired, suggesting he may have been approaching his killer. Though the precise sequence was impossible to determine, one thing was clear: the final shot, the one that ended it, was fired last. Kitty Menendez's autopsy was even more horrifying. A shotgun blast to her left cheek shattered her jaw, obliterated teeth, and tore through her tongue. Her right thumb was nearly severed, a desperate attempt to shield herself from the barrel of the gun. She had been shot in the chest, the forearm, the leg. 3 wounds punctured her left thigh. One blast tore through her skull, leaving behind a trail of devastation. Dr. Golden noted something peculiar. Her wounds contained shotgun pellets. Unlike Jose's, it suggested the shooters had used different ammunition, perhaps even reloaded mid-attack, unaware of the variation. Then came the most chilling detail: a wound to Kitty's left knee, fired from front to back, suggested something more than murder, something symbolic. To Dr. Golden and investigators, this looked like a staged hit. It's an imitation of a mafia-style execution, deliberately theatrical. But why? Was it an intentional message? Or an effort to throw off investigators? To answer that, detectives began digging into the Menendez family history. Jose Menendez's roots traced back to Cuba, where he was born into a wealthy, well-connected family. His father, a celebrated soccer player and owner of an accounting firm. His mother, a national swimming champion, later inducted into the Cuban Sports Hall of Fame. Jose was the youngest of 3. Spoiled, ambitious, determined. But his privileged world collapsed with the Cuban Revolution. When Fidel Castro seized power, everything changed. The elite lost their land and wealth. Private property was seized. Farms were collectivized. For the first time, Jose's family faced true uncertainty. At just 16 years old, Jose was sent to the United States alone to escape the political chaos. He arrived in Pennsylvania, penniless, speaking little English but hungry for success. He studied hard, hustled harder, and never forgot what had been taken from him. What no one knew at the time was that his greatest struggle was yet to come. Not in Cuba, not in America, but within the walls of his own home. Asterisk. From the moment he stepped foot in America, Jose Menendez had one goal: to rise to the top. Born into wealth in pre-revolutionary Cuba, he had watched everything his family's land, privilege, and stability vanish with the rise of Fidel Castro. At just 16, he was shipped off to the United States, alone, with no English and no money. But he had ambition and dreams. Big ones. One of those dreams was to attend an Ivy League university, the pinnacle of American success. Him to Southern Illinois University, not quite the Ivy League, but a start. It was there that he met Kitty Anderson, a bright, sensitive young woman working in the university's broadcasting department. Kitty's past was a shadow she never fully escaped. Raised in a home marred by violence and betrayal, she had endured her father's infidelity and explosive temper. Those early wounds made her quiet, even withdrawn. But beneath that reserved exterior was a woman fiercely determined to carve out a better future. She buried herself in books and ambition. In 1962, Fate brought Jose and Kitty together, two people from vastly different worlds, united by a hunger for success. Their romance bloomed quickly, and soon they became one of the most talked-about couples on campus. He was fiery, Cuban, and confident. She was all-American, blonde, and composed. In 1960s Illinois, where social norms clung tightly to the past, their relationship turned heads, and not all in approval. Both families were skeptical. Kitty's parents looked down on Jose's immigrant background. Jose's relatives, now living in the U.S., scoffed at Kitty's divorced family and warned that Jose was too young for marriage, but the couple didn't care. In 1963, they eloped. Kitty had just earned her degree in communication sciences. They slipped away, married in another city, and soon relocated to New York, closer to Jose's family, and to opportunity. Jose was relentless. Kitty, who once dreamed of a career in radio, gave it all up to support her husband's ambition. In 1967, Jose graduated from Queens College and quickly landed a job at the prestigious accounting firm Coopers & Lybrand. Kitty, meanwhile, took a job teaching elementary school. Their first son, Lyle, was born not long after. Then came Jose's big break. During a client meeting with Lion Container, he impressed the executives and was offered a managerial role in Hinsdale, Illinois. With his star rising, the Menendez family packed up and moved again. Kitty became a full-time mother. By 1970, Jose had climbed to the presidency of Lion Container, a rapid ascent, but a short-lived one. A power struggle with the company's chairman ended in his dismissal. But setbacks never slowed him down. In 1971, Jose joined Hertz, prompting another move, this time to New Jersey. Their Kitty gave birth to their second son, Erik. Jose climbed the corporate ladder with alarming speed. By 35, he was the company's global general manager, driven, charismatic, increasingly ruthless. His reputation as a businessman was growing, but so was his reputation for being cold, controlling, and merciless with subordinates. In 1980, Jose lost his position at Hertz and pivoted to a new opportunity at RCA's entertainment division. It was a natural fit. He loved power, and the entertainment industry was brimming with it. At RCA, he took the reins of the struggling music division and made bold moves. Signing major acts like the Eurythmics and Jefferson Starship, he manipulated numbers to paint a rosier picture, flooding stores with albums to inflate sales, a gamble that backfired when unsold records were returned en masse. By 1986, RCA had lost $25 million, and yet Jose was promoted. In 1985, became Executive Vice President and Global Operations Director for RCA Records. He had climbed from immigrant teen to entertainment mogul, true American success story. But at home, things were unraveling. Kitty, once vibrant, had withered into the background of her husband's ambitious life. Jose made every decision unilaterally, from careers to cross-country moves, and Kitty, silenced and weary, simply followed. Over time, she became a ghost in her own marriage, and Jose, he began having affairs. Multiple affairs. Kitty knew, but said nothing, because in the Menendez family, appearances were everything, and secrets stayed locked behind the mansion doors. Asterisk before the marriage collapsed completely. There had been whispers. Jose Menendez, powerful, ambitious, and increasingly distant, had been entangled with a confident Manhattan businesswoman named Louise. With her striking dark hair and commanding presence, she was everything Kitty wasn't at the time: strong, self-assured, unapologetically. Independent Kitty, emotionally fragile and lost in her role as a stay-at-home wife, didn't immediately suspect the affair. But over time, signs emerged when she finally uncovered Jose's betrayal, not just with Louise, but with multiple women. She packed her bags and left. It didn't last. Jose pleaded for her return, perhaps out of guilt, or perhaps because he feared the impact a public separation might have on his carefully crafted image and on their two sons, Lyle and Erik. Kitty, no stranger to the emotional devastation of betrayal, agreed to come home, but the damage had been done. In 1986, in what seemed to be a twisted gesture of transparency, Jose confessed everything. He admitted to his affair with Louise and others Kitty never even knew about. The revelation shattered her. Long-buried childhood wounds reopened. She fell into a deep depression, darker than ever before, and even began expressing suicidal thoughts. Their marriage was unraveling. Kitty was emotionally crumbling, and Jose, he was still chasing his next big title. Despite the chaos at home, Jose accepted a new position as president of Live Entertainment, a film company behind the blockbuster Rambo franchise. He dragged his family across the country to California, hoping to reinvent himself once more, as if geography could fix what was broken. The Menendezes landed in Calabasas, a wealthy suburb nestled in the hills near Beverly Hills, but not everyone was on board with the fresh start. Kitty hated it. The move pulled her further from the familiar and deeper into isolation. She missed their old home and loathed the West Coast lifestyle. Her mental health continued to decline. Only Erik moved with them. Lyle stayed behind in Princeton, where he was attending university, though he visited frequently. Outwardly, Jose seemed to have regained momentum. By 1991, he was thriving at Live Entertainment. The company even awarded him a $15 million life insurance policy, with an additional $5 million covering the rest of the family. He was still difficult, feared at work, authoritarian at home, but he had built an empire. But that empire would soon collapse. After Jose and Kitty's shocking deaths, something strange happened. The family's financial accounts began to shift. Investigators traced a series of unusual transactions, money being accessed and redirected. The new beneficiaries of the Menendez fortune. Lyle and Erik. Just 5 days after the murders, the brothers organized a memorial service in Los Angeles. They arrived nearly an hour late. Erik's face was swollen and red as if he'd been crying or trying to suppress something. Lyle, in contrast, walked in with a steady, calm, composed, almost rehearsed. He spoke with confidence, presenting himself as the new patriarch of the family. The guests, mostly business elites familiar with Jose's legacy, embraced him. He spoke of Princeton, of business ventures, of legacy. Soon after, Lyle launched Menendez Investment Enterprises, a company bearing his family's name. 3 days later, they hosted a second memorial, this time at Princeton University. Lyle gave an emotional half-hour speech filled with stories of childhood, values, and loss. Erik stood silently at his side, but the cracks were beginning to show. Friends noticed a shift. Lyle became increasingly business-focused, trying to replicate Jose's career path. Erik, still fragile, seemed lost, torn between enrolling in college or pursuing professional tennis, passion that offered escape but little direction. Meanwhile, Detectives Les Solar and Tim Linehan were deep into the investigation. New testimonies began to complicate the picture of Jose as simply a successful executive. As stories emerged of his iron-fisted leadership style, former colleagues described him as brutal, cold, and intimidating, opening the door to theories about revenge or a corporate hit. But Zoller was caught off guard during a private conversation with Peter and Karen Veer. Close friends of the Menendez family, Peter hesitated before speaking. Then he said something unexpected. "I don't know what happened that night, but I'm starting to suspect it was the boys." Les paused. "Why?" he asked. What Peter would reveal next would take the investigation in a shocking new direction, one that would shift suspicion away from shadowy enemies and straight into the heart of the Menendez home. Asterisk. There was something off about the Menendez brothers, something that didn't quite add up. That's what Peter Veer told investigators when asked about Lyle and Erik. He couldn't explain it precisely. The boys were always overly polite, almost rehearsed in their kindness, too perfect, too polished. And somehow, unnatural. His comment struck a chord with Detective Les Solar, who, until then, had been following more conventional leads. But Peter's gut instinct convinced him to pivot the focus from external suspects to the children of the victims. It didn't take long for detectives to find their first red flag: money. Within days of their parents' murder, Lyle and Erik began spending freely and shamelessly. There were luxury cars, a sleek charcoal gray Porsche, 911 Carrera, and a custom Jeep Wrangler. Then came designer clothes, jewelry, and Rolex watches, totaling over $15,000 in just one spree. The timing raised eyebrows. Most grieving children aren't blowing fortunes days after their parents. Brutal murder. But that was just the beginning. At the time of his death, Jose Menendez owned 330,000 shares of Live Entertainment, each worth $20, along with luxury properties, cars, and high-end assets. The Menendez estate was worth a staggering $14 million. After taxes and debts were settled, each brother received approximately $2 million, but they weren't satisfied, close friends told detectives. The brothers expected far more and were convinced that Jose had hidden a secret fortune overseas, possibly in Swiss bank accounts. Disappointment turned to entitlement, and soon to reckless behavior. To make matters worse, they learned that Jose's $15 million life insurance policy would not pay out because he'd never completed the required medical examination. Furious, the brothers claimed they felt unsafe in the mansion, saying the same mafia killers might return. They insisted on relocating to luxury hotels, and Live Entertainment footed the bill. The company covered $8,800 in hotel stays,
bodyguards,
and even a private limousine. But soon, even their security detail began to question the brothers' behavior. Lyle once leaped from a moving limo just to buy something he saw in a shop window. Another time, he dropped $24,000 on audio equipment. Without a second thought, eventually, the guards were dismissed. When asked, Lyle claimed an uncle from New Jersey had made peace with the mafia on their behalf, a man who, according to records, had zero connections to organized crime. The lie only deepened police suspicion. The brothers moved from hotel to hotel before finally settling into high-end apartments in Marina del Rey. Lyle's monthly rent? $2,150 Erik's. $2,450. Then came a down payment on a $990,000 penthouse. A deal that later fell through when financing was denied. But the spending didn't stop. In October 1989, Lyle used his dead father's credit card to spend $90,000. Claiming he was flying around the country for business deals, he soon launched Menendez Investment Enterprises, a company that, in reality, was just a front. He rented office space in a Princeton shopping center and named his college, friends most of whom had zero business experience as company directors. Detectives quickly learned the so-called company never operated. It was little more than an expensive illusion, a performance by a young man desperate to step into his father's shoes without ever earning the place. In one particularly baffling move, Lyle tried to buy Teresa's Pizza, a popular local restaurant. When the owner refused, he instead purchased Chuck's Spring, a chicken wing joint, paying $550,000 for a business worth just $200,000. Family members were stunned. Some saw the move as reckless. Others thought it might give Lyle a sense of purpose. He rebranded the place as Mr. Buffalo's, expanded delivery hours, started talking about opening franchise locations in malls, called college campuses, and across New Jersey. But the rebrand alienated locals. Chuck's was a Princeton staple. Lyle, no matter how expensive his suits or confident his tone, was not a restaurateur. He was, as the investigators would later say, a young man with millions in blood money, playing the role of a businessman, while running from a crime he could no longer outrun. Asterisk. Despite the financial chaos of Mr. Buffalo's, Lyle Menendez wasn't slowing down. He spoke optimistically about opening a second location, even though the first had yet to turn a profit. In reality, the restaurant was bleeding money, and Lyle wasn't the only one sinking fast. Erik Menendez was following a similar path of reckless ambition. Desperate to carve out his own identity, he invested $40,000 to sponsor a rock concert at the Hollywood Palladium. But the plan imploded when the event organizer vanished. Taking the money with him, shaken by the scam, Erik abandoned his dreams of business and threw himself fully into his first love, tennis. He hired a private coach with an annual salary of $60,000. And soon, the brothers were back to their favorite routine, spending extravagantly and traveling constantly, their lavish lifestyle, just months after the brutal murder of their parents, set off alarm bells for investigators. Suspicion deepened when Glenn Stevens, one of Lyle's former friends, came forward with a stunning claim. Lyle had hired 2 computer experts to wipe data from his personal computer. One of the technicians confirmed it. He'd been paid to permanently delete files. Then came a crucial moment. On October 24th, Detective Les Zoller sat down for a formal interview with Erik Menendez at the Beverly Hills mansion. Erik appeared. Tense, he spoke of growing conflict with Lyle, particularly over money. He even told Les that Lyle was starting to act like their father, hinting at a deeper resentment. Despite the cracks in his story, Zoller left the meeting without a confession. But later that night, Erik made 2 phone calls. The first was to Lyle in Princeton, who didn't answer. The second was to Dr. Jerome Aziel, a psychotherapist, and that call would change everything. The turning point came from someone unexpected, Craig Signorelli, Erik's childhood friend and confidant. On November 17th, Craig contacted Detective Zoller and Tim Linehan and dropped a bombshell. 12 days after the murders, Craig had visited the Menendez mansion. There, in the same house where Jose and Kitty had been killed, Erik offered a chilling hypothetical. Do you want to know how it could have happened? According to Craig, Erik laid out the entire plan casually, as if it were just a scenario. He said he and Lyle had returned to the mansion that night to retrieve a fake ID, while Erik walked toward the car. Lyle suddenly appeared with 2 shotguns and told him, "It's time." Their roles were clear. Lyle would kill Jose. Erik would kill Kitty. Erik described entering the living room and seeing his father. Lyle fired the first shot. Jose tried to flee but collapsed. Erik admitted. He couldn't bring himself to shoot their mother, not at first. Kitty tried to run. Lyle gunned her down. Then, in a chilling moment of finality, Erik approached her lifeless body and fired 2 more shots. The level of detail stunned investigators. But the language, how it could have happened, kept it in a dangerous gray area. It was suggestive, deeply disturbing, but not legally actionable. Zoller and Linehan took the statement to Deputy District Attorney Pam Ferrero, who agreed. There wasn't enough to file charges. But she proposed a bold strategy, turn Craig into an informant. With some reluctance, Craig agreed. On November 29th, he met Erik for dinner at Gladstone's in Malibu. The conversation was tense. Erik denied any role in the murders, brushing off the earlier story as something he had made up. Wasn't the confession they'd hoped for, but to Ferrero, Erik's defensive behavior was revealing. She believed Craig had been telling the truth. Meanwhile, investigators began hunting for the murder weapons, the shotguns. Zoller contacted the Department of Justice and requested records of all shotgun sales in Los Angeles County. The result? A list spanning 80 pages. It was overwhelming and ultimately a dead end. The team concluded that the brothers likely hadn't purchased the weapons under their real names. It would take a different kind of evidence to crack the case wide open. And that evidence was coming not from the streets, but from inside a therapist's office. Asterisk, asterisk. As the months dragged on, frustration set in. Investigators feared that Erik and Lyle Menendez, now living comfortably off their inheritance, might escape justice altogether. The trail had grown cold, and with no murder weapon and no confessions admissible in court, the case seemed stalled. Then, everything changed. In a twist no one saw coming. A 37-year-old woman named Judalon Smythe walked into the Beverly Hills Police Department with a revelation that would reignite the entire investigation. Judalon wasn't a stranger to the case. She had been romantically involved with Dr. Jerome Aziel, the psychotherapist treating Erik Menendez. One night, Judalon claimed Dr. Aziel made a grave mistake. He played her a tape, a recording, from one of Erik and Lyle's therapy sessions. It's dated late October 1989. What she heard stunned her on the tape. Lyle could be heard shouting at Erik, furious that his younger brother had revealed everything during their sessions. He even said, chillingly, that they would have to kill Dr. Aziel to protect themselves. Erik, sobbing, refused. "I can't kill anyone else," he said. Judalon also told investigators that she had personally seen Lyle leave the therapist's office after threatening him. Despite this, Dr. Aziel continued seeing the brothers, claiming he was helping them come to terms with their actions. Judalon also revealed another detail. The shotguns had supposedly been dumped in a canyon near Mulholland Drive. A search of the area turned up nothing. Weapons were gone. Still, Judelan's testimony was a game-changer. With her information, detectives were finally able to secure a search warrant. On March 8, 1990, nearly a year and a half after the murders, investigators raided Dr. Oziel's office and seized 17 audio tapes and 7 pages of handwritten notes. Right then and there, Oziel played portions of the tapes for police. What they heard was undeniable. Erik and Lyle, in their own voices, confessing to the murders and explaining the reasons behind the brutal act. The recordings were sealed, labeled as critical evidence, and transported to the Los Angeles County Courthouse in Santa Monica. Legally, the threat Lyle made against Dr. Oziel was crucial. It nullified the usual therapist-patient confidentiality, opening the door for prosecutors to use the tapes in court, but it would ultimately be up to a judge to determine whether the evidence would hold. As the tapes were reviewed, a clearer picture of the Menendez brothers' state of mind and their motives began to emerge. To fully understand that picture, investigators had to go back to the boys' childhood and the home they grew up in. Accounts from relatives, former friends, and eventually from the brothers themselves painted a disturbing image. From a young age, Lyle and Erik lived under relentless control. Jose and Kitty dictated everything: what they ate, what they read, even how they spent their leisure time. There was no space to be children. The constant pressure manifested physically. Both boys developed stutters. Erik suffered from stomach pains. Lyle ground his teeth at night. These weren't just signs of stress, they were symptoms of an oppressive household. Dominated by Jose's authoritarian parenting style, Jose Menendez was a man obsessed with control and image. At work, he humiliated employees. At home, he demanded perfection. He even insisted that colleagues call him Joe, in an effort to appear more assimilated. More American, this environment forged an unusual, almost dependent bond between the brothers. They leaned on each other for survival, emotionally if not physically. Friends often commented on how Erik idolized Lyle, clinging to him in a way that felt more desperate than brotherly. In the late 1970s, when the family lived in Princeton, New Jersey, the boys were enrolled in Princeton Day School, a prestigious institution where neither thrived. Lyle was unfocused and immature. Erik followed the same path. Teachers began to suspect that their assignments were completed with adult help. At home, Kitty and Jose were heavily involved in their son's schoolwork, unintentionally stunting their independence. There were other signs of arrested development. Even at 14 or 15, the brothers still played with teddy bears. Jose, meanwhile, refused to acknowledge their struggles. He doubled down on his strict parenting, testing them at the dinner table, quizzing them on obscure facts to gauge their intellect. Over time, the quizzes became power plays. On one occasion, Jose asked each son to pick a sport, but insisted they choose different ones. He didn't want the boys to appear too close. Their bond made him uncomfortable. It challenged his authority, and he feared it would expose cracks in the image of control, so carefully curated. What no one yet knew, what would later be revealed in court, was that this pressure, this control, and something far darker, had been building for years, and in the end, it would all explode in a storm of gunfire on a warm August night in Beverly Hills. Asterisk, despite their father's strict request to pursue different sports, Lyle and Erik Menendez both chose tennis, a quiet act of defiance that would be one of many. As the early 1980s unfolded, cracks in the family's carefully constructed image began to show. The first disturbing signs appeared in the summer of 1982. Their cousin, Diane Vandermolen, came to stay with the Menendez family. One evening, what began as innocent horseplay took a dark turn. While roughhousing with Diane, the brothers suddenly pinned her down and began tearing at her clothes. They tied her up, removed the rest. Diane screamed in terror. The boys froze, shocked, as if they didn't fully understand what they'd done. But the moment passed without consequence. Days later, Lyle assaulted Diane again, this time while they were watching television. He lunged at her without warning, groping her chest. Diane resisted, and the attack stopped. No one reported it. Around the same time, Lyle began dating Stacy Feldman, the well-liked manager of the boys' tennis team. Teachers and staff viewed the couple favorably, believing their relationship grounded them both. Lyle showered Stacy with expensive gifts, jewelry, designer accessories, even dreams of marriage. But Stacy eventually realized she wasn't ready to settle down. When she got accepted into college, she broke things off. Lyle was devastated. In a desperate bid to win her back, he offered her a fur coat, more extravagant than any previous gift. Stacy refused, and with that, the relationship ended for good. Lyle tried to refocus, but his academic disinterest was impossible to hide. He didn't want college. He wanted to open a restaurant. But Jose had other plans, big ones. He projected his own Ivy League dreams onto his son, determined that Lyle would go where he never could. But Lyle's grades told a different story. In 1986, he applied to Princeton University and was rejected, humiliated. Lyle enrolled in a local college and reapplied. During the wait, he met Jamie Pizersick, a young waitress and part-time tennis instructor. Jose and Kitty were immediately suspicious. They believed Jamie was after their son's wealth, not his affection. Despite their disapproval, Lyle was accepted to Princeton and, in the same breath, proposed to Jamie, a move that enraged Jose. Determined to cut ties, Jose orchestrated a calculated separation. He arranged for Jamie to receive a coaching offer from a European company, one that required relocation overseas. It worked. But Lyle followed her. He abandoned his studies to chase love across the Atlantic. Eventually, he returned and reluctantly signed Princeton's honor code, a formal vow to uphold academic integrity. But Lyle treated it like a joke. In his first semester back, he plagiarized a classmate's psychology paper and submitted it as his own. He was caught, and the matter went before Princeton's disciplinary committee. Jose tried to intervene, penning an ethics letter defending his son. He downplayed the plagiarism as minor, just one assignment, not a thesis or major exam, but the committee didn't buy it. Lyle was suspended for 1 year, embarrassed but undeterred. Jose tried another approach. He brought Lyle into live entertainment, his company. Lyle was given a soft role, reviewing expense reports and recommending cost-cutting measures. It was a chance to prove himself. Instead, he showed just how entitled he had become. Employees recalled that Lyle skipped meetings, left the office on hot days to play tennis, and acted arrogantly. He was rude, self-absorbed, and clearly writing his father's name. Even meetings with Jose had to be scheduled like royal audiences. Any reprimands were made in public, never in private. Eventually, Jose had had enough. He fired his own son. In the fall of 1988, Lyle returned to Princeton, but immediately caused more trouble. This time, he was furious that he had been assigned a roommate. He had grown accustomed to private accommodations. Without warning, he threw the students' belongings into the hallway. Once again, Jose intervened. He wrote to the university and, unsurprisingly, secured another single room for his son. But no amount of wealth or privilege could mask what Lyle was becoming: a young man spiraling out of control, disconnected from reality, and dangerously entitled. The seeds of violence had been sown long ago, and soon the world would see how far they had grown. Asterisk. By the spring of 1989, Lyle Menendez had moved on from Jamie, only to step into another controversial relationship. This time he was dating Christy, a 30-year-old model, a woman older than him by nearly a decade. To Jose and Kitty, the relationship was more than just inappropriate, it was unacceptable. They disapproved of the age gap and saw it as another sign that Lyle was spiraling further from the path they had envisioned. Their concerns deepened when they discovered that Lyle now hated Princeton and wanted to transfer. Jose was livid. Had worked tirelessly to get his son into the Ivy League. To him, quitting Princeton wasn't an option. He demanded that Lyle stay no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Erik was facing his own downward spiral, growing up in the long shadow of his older brother, but displaying even more disturbing behavior. After graduating high school, Kitty began to suspect Erik might be gay, a thought that unsettled her deeply. In a misguided attempt to correct him, she pressured him into dating girls. But when Erik finally did begin a relationship, things took a troubling turn. During an argument, he locked his girlfriend in her room, refusing to let her out. She screamed until she managed to escape. Later, she told friends that Erik was the strangest man she had ever met, emotionally volatile, insecure, and deeply arrogant. Erik later dated Janice, a wealthy young woman, but the most intense connection in his life remained his friendship with Craig Signorelli, a former schoolmate who would one day become a key witness in the murder investigation. By mid-1988, the brothers' behavior had escalated even further. They were now breaking into homes. Over the span of a year, Lyle and Erik committed a string of burglaries, stealing an estimated $100,000 worth of property from friends' houses. The crimes went undetected until Erik was pulled over for a routine traffic stop. Inside his car, officers found a stolen item. Jose was furious. He immediately hired one of Los Angeles' top criminal defense attorneys, Gerald Chelliff, and devised a plan to protect the family name. The attorney struck a deal with prosecutors. Erik would take full responsibility, sparing Lyle from any charges. Erik was sentenced to community service, and both brothers were ordered to begin mandatory therapy. Shortly after, the Menendez family relocated from Calabasas to Beverly Hills, following a new job opportunity for Jose. Later, after the double homicide, investigators would revisit this history of burglary, and though the evidence clearly linked Lyle and Erik to other crimes, they chose to focus solely on the murders. Then came March 8, 1990, the day everything changed that morning. Live Entertainment's board of directors received a private memo from legal counsel. Lyle and Erik Menendez were about to be arrested. Everyone knew. Everyone, that is, except the brothers. The original plan was to arrest them together. But Erik had flown to Israel, competing in a tennis tournament. With only Lyle left in Beverly Hills, authorities waited. They decided not to raid the family mansion. Jose's elderly mother, Maria Menendez, was inside, and they feared she could be used as leverage. Instead, they waited for Lyle to leave on his own. That afternoon, Lyle exited the mansion with two friends, driving to lunch at the Cheesecake Factory. As they pulled away in a Jeep, Lyle noticed a blue car idling suspiciously on the street. He deliberately drove into it. When he threw the Jeep in reverse, he backed straight into a police van, which had quietly boxed him in. The trap was closed. Lyle and his two friends were handcuffed and taken to the West Hollywood Sheriff's Station. Lyle was charged with the murders of Jose and Kitty Menendez and transferred to L.A. County Men's Central Jail in downtown Los Angeles. Word of Lyle's arrest reached Erik quickly. Panicked, he called his uncle, seeking guidance. The family feared Erik might flee, but they also knew something else. He was emotionally tethered to Lyle, would likely follow him, even into a prison cell. On March 11th, detectives Les Zoller and Tim Linehan personally greeted Erik at LAX, placing him under arrest as he stepped off the plane. In a packed press conference, District Attorney Ira Reiner laid it out plainly. The motive was greed. The Menendez brothers stood accused of cold-blooded murder, carried out for money, control, and freedom. Reiner added that if convicted, Lyle and Erik could face the gas chamber at San Quentin. The nation was stunned. Two wealthy, handsome young men, born into privilege, had seemingly thrown it all away. The story was horrifying, but impossible to ignore. They had it all. And somehow, it still wasn't enough. Asterisk, although the arrest of Lyle and Erik Menendez stunned the nation, the Beverly Hills Police Department still lacked one crucial element: hard evidence directly tying the brothers to the murders. Under immense public pressure, detectives Les Zoller and Tim Linehan ramped up their investigation. Focusing on a lingering mystery, the origin of the murder weapons, they revisited the testimony of Judalon Smythe, who had told police that the brothers discarded the shotguns in a canyon. That clue pointed investigators south, toward San Diego. They started with an exhaustive list of gun retailers in the region. The first lead was a small shop along the freeway connecting Los Angeles to San Diego. Nothing. Zoller and his team moved on, working their way through smaller stores, one by one. Still no success. Then came a shift in strategy. They focused on stores known for discount sales. That pivot led them to Big Five Sporting Goods on Convoy Street. And there, they struck gold. Store records revealed that on August 18, 1989, just 2 days before the murders, two Mossberg won to gauge. Shotguns had been purchased for $199.95 each. The purchase was made under the name Donovan J. Goodrow, using a San Diego address. The address turned out to be fake. But the driver's license number on the form was real, and it belonged to Donovan. When investigators tracked him down, Donovan was living in New York, managing a restaurant. He had a solid alibi. He'd been there on the day of the purchase. After examining the store form, Donovan said the signature wasn't his, and added that his license had been stolen months earlier. This discovery led prosecutors to order handwriting analysis. Lyle agreed to submit a sample. Erik refused. Investigators soon uncovered that Lyle and Donovan had briefly attended the same university, making it entirely plausible that Lyle had stolen the license and used it to buy the weapons. As the case gained traction, the Menendez family hired one of the most formidable criminal defense attorneys in the country, Leslie Abramson. Fierce, fiery, and barely 5 feet tall, Abramson was already a courtroom legend, a defense attorney known for her relentless cross-examinations and zero tolerance for intimidation. By the time she joined the case, Abramson had handled 14 major murder cases, with only one resulting in a death sentence. And now, she was determined to keep Lyle and Erik Menendez off death row. The brothers made their first court appearance on March 26, 1990, at the Beverly Hills Municipal Court. The presiding judge was Judith Stein. As they entered the courtroom, Lyle and Erik smiled, waved to friends, and acted as though they were merely attending a family gathering. Not standing trial for the execution-style murder of their parents, Judge Stein was not amused. She watched their arrogance closely and demanded they both stand and face her. When they did, their barely concealed laughter infuriated her. Behind her bench, she saw not victims, but two young men who believed money and charm could bury murder. While the preliminary hearings played out, the case encountered a legal minefield. The Santa Monica Superior Court had to determine whether the recordings made by Dr. Jerome, Lyle Erik's psychotherapist, could legally be used in court. Judge James Albrecht ultimately ruled that 3 audio tapes were admissible as evidence. One, dated December 11, 1989, featured Lyle and Erik discussing specific details of the murders. That recording would become the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Further tapes revealed another disturbing detail prior to the murders. The brothers had watched The Billionaire Boys Club. The 2-part miniseries aired in July 1989. The show followed a group of wealthy young men in Beverly Hills who committed 2 murders, including one involving a member's father. The eerie parallels were hard to ignore. The Menendez brothers denied any influence from the show, but prosecutors were skeptical. Was it coincidence or inspiration? Legal battles over the tapes dragged on, causing significant delays. It wasn't until June 1992 that the California Supreme Court blocked the release of the most damaging recording, citing privileged communication. By then, Lyle and Erik had already spent 3 years behind bars, waiting trial in Los Angeles County Jail. In December of that year, the county grand jury formally indicted the brothers for the murders of Jose and Kitty Menendez. The trial was set for July 1993 to be held in Los Angeles County Superior Court under the gavel of Judge Stanley Weisberg, a man known for handling high-profile cases and for keeping a tight leash in his courtroom. The stage was finally set. What would follow was one of the most controversial and emotionally charged trials of the decade. A courtroom drama that would grip America, blur the line between justice and spectacle, and turn the Menendez name into something far more chilling than just a last name. Asterisk. From the opening statements, defense attorney Leslie Abramson made her strategy clear. The real villains in this story, she claimed, were not her clients but their victims. In front of a packed courtroom, Abramson painted Jose and Kitty Menendez as the architects of their own deaths, alleging that years of psychological torment and sexual abuse, particularly by Jose, had driven Lyle and Erik to kill out of desperation and fear. The defense presented the brothers as once promising, affluent, tennis-playing teenagers, now emotionally wrecked by the trauma inflicted upon them behind closed doors. Spoiled, yes. Privileged, certainly. But also deeply damaged. The prosecution was caught off guard. Till that moment, neither Lyle nor Erik had ever publicly claimed abuse. There were no medical reports, no photographs, no hospital visits to substantiate the defense's story. But Leslie didn't need hard proof, at least, not yet. She was building something else, a narrative, and she knew how to tell it. On the very first day of trial, Lyle and Erik entered the courtroom wearing children's sweaters, preppy shirts and khaki pants as if they were 12 and 15 again, not 25 and 22. The visual message was obvious. These were boys trapped in men's bodies, never allowed to grow up. Abramson reinforced this image daily. She fixed their collars, brushed lint off their shoulders, and at times placed her hands gently on their backs, a maternal presence standing protectively between them and death row. She wasn't defending killers, she was rescuing broken sons. But prosecutor Pam Bozinich wasn't buying it. When it was her turn, she tore into the defense's emotional framing. Her opening argument was blunt and powerful. This wasn't a crime of passion or fear. It was cold-blooded murder. She described the scene in stark detail, Jose and Kitty relaxing on the couch in their living room when their sons entered and opened fire. Not one warning, no confrontation. Just execution. Bozinach hammered the prosecution's central point. Lyle and Erik were manipulators. Skilled liars who had fabricated the abuse narrative to avoid the gas chamber. She pointed to their extravagant spending spree immediately after. The murder's designer watches, luxury cars, lavish trips as proof of their true motives, greed and freedom. Still, the defense pressed forward. Abramson argued that the murders were not premeditated, but triggered by a moment of unbearable truth. Erik had allegedly confessed to Lyle that Jose had sexually abused him for over a decade. The revelation shattered Lyle, who confronted their father. Jose's response, according to the defense, was chilling. I'll do whatever I want with my son, and don't you ever threaten me again. That, Abramson claimed, was the breaking point. Shortly after that confrontation, the brothers allegedly drove to San Diego using a stolen ID to purchase 2 shotguns. As for Erik's previous silence, Abramson explained that he was overwhelmed with shame, only later revealing the truth to select family members. But the prosecution wasn't convinced. They believed that Erik and Lyle had carefully rehearsed the story of abuse, feeding it to relatives who would later appear as defense witnesses. Throughout the trial's first phase, the prosecution called 26 witnesses, including Lyle's bodyguards, a clerk from the Big 5 sporting goods store, and multiple investigators, all woven together to present a single, compelling narrative. Lyle and Erik were compulsive liars. Among the first pieces of evidence was Lyle's 911 call, played in full for the jury. Bozinich argued that the tape revealed not panic, but performance, a well-timed display of false grief. Detective Les Zoller took the stand next, recounting that just hours after the murders, the brothers had returned to the mansion and asked if they could retrieve their tennis rackets. The coroner was still examining their parents' bodies. The request, according to Zoller, was callous, calculated, and chilling. Then came the weapons expert. Demonstrating how the Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun operated, the expert explained that firing multiple shots required more than a trigger pull. The shooter had to manually pump the shotgun and reload between shots. An action that took attention and intent. This wasn't the act of someone in a frenzy. This was methodical. It was premeditated. But perhaps the most explosive testimony came from Dr. Jerome Azil, the psychotherapist who had recorded the brothers' confessions. He stated that Lyle and Erik had told him they felt trapped and controlled by their father, and that their only escape was to kill him. As for Kitty, Azil claimed the brothers said they couldn't leave a witness alive. That cold admission that their mother was killed, not out of fear, but out of necessity, shook the courtroom. What began as a story of alleged Victimization was now confronting the darker possibility that two young men, shaped by wealth and warped by power, had turned deadly, not out of fear, but entitlement. The jury was left with a difficult question. Were Lyle and Erik victims of horrific abuse, or master manipulators spinning a story to escape justice? Though the defense had won key early battles, the prosecution wasn't backing down. They wanted Dr. Jerome Azil to testify that the Menendez brothers were sociopaths, calculating, remorseless killers, but the defense fought hard to block that characterization, arguing that the term sociopath was a loaded, non-clinical label designed to prejudice the jury. The court agreed. The word was barred. Instead, Leslie Abramson leaned deeper into her strategy of emotional manipulation. She doubled down on the claim that Lyle and Erik had acted in a state of imminent danger. Under California law, if the defense could prove that the brothers genuinely feared for their lives, that a reasonable person in their position would have felt the same a verdict of acquittal or reduced sentencing was still possible. When Erik took the stand, he painted a disturbing picture. Claimed he was convinced his parents were planning to kill him. He described Kitty as a haunting, all-controlling figure. A mother who always knew where he was, what he was doing, and who he was with. To many in the courtroom, his claims seemed childlike, but that was exactly what the defense intended to portray the brothers as emotionally stunted. Traumatized children, trapped in adult bodies. Then Erik made a shocking admission. He described how, over years of alleged sexual abuse, he began putting cinnamon in his father's tea and coffee. After hearing it could alter the taste of semen, the testimony was met with gasps. It was disturbing, graphic, devastating. The trial dragged on for months. Then, in January 1994, after 16 days of jury deliberation, a verdict was expected. But the jury returned with a message. They were deadlocked. They could not agree on whether the Menendez brothers were murderers or victims, the judge declared. A mistrial. In August 1994, second trial began, this time under much tighter control. The prosecution came ready for war. They accused Lyle and Erik of not only planning the murders but attempting to stage the killings to look like a mafia execution. Their theory? The lagoons inflicted on Kitty were deliberate, a brutal mimicry of organized crime tactics. Expert Roger McCarthy, a forensic analyst from Failure Analysis Associates, used a computer-generated reconstruction to guide jurors through each shot fired that night. According to his analysis, the brothers entered the mansion through the office, then made their way to the living room. The only light came from the flicker of the television. Jose Menendez was dozing on the beige couch, legs stretched out, feet propped on the coffee table near two plates of melting berries and ice cream. Kitty was curled up under a blanket, her head resting on Jose's lap. Then dashed gunfire. 2 blasts rang out. One shattered the glass of the French doors behind the sofa. Another ripped into Jose's arms, his elbow, his forearm. As he struggled to react, a third shot immobilized him. Then one of the brothers stepped behind the couch, placed the shotgun to the back of Jose's head, and pulled the trigger. His skull split open. His lifeless body collapsed to the side, slumping onto the blood-soaked cushions. Kitty woke to chaos. Her husband's blood on her skin, his brains on her hands. She screamed and tried to flee, but the brothers weren't finished. A shot to her. Right leg dropped her instantly. Another tore through her right arm. She collapsed between the sofa and coffee table, slipping in her own blood as she tried to stand. Another blast struck her chest, piercing a lung, spilling over a liter of blood into her ribcage. Still, she was alive. Breathing. Crawling. But the brothers had run out of shells. They hesitated and decided they returned to the car, reloaded their shotguns with buckshot, more powerful, more devastating, and went back inside. Kitty was barely conscious. One brother stepped over the coffee table, placed the barrel against her left cheek, and fired. Her face disintegrated. Her skull was destroyed. Kitty Menendez was shot 10 times, including 4 times to the head to cover their tracks. The brothers then shot themselves in the legs, carefully collected the spent casings from the blood-soaked carpet, and staged the scene to confuse investigators. The prosecution laid out this narrative in stark, meticulous detail, a portrait of cold-blooded murder, not a panicked act of self-defense. They argued that there was no evidence to support the claim that the brothers were in any immediate danger at the time of the killings. And on February 16th, the judge agreed. The defense's claim of imminent threat had no legal foundation. With the abuse defense collapsing and the brutal, step-by-step recreation of the crime fresh in jurors' minds, the Menendez brothers' fate was rapidly closing in. Asterisk with the court rejecting the defense's claim of imminent danger, the jury was finally cleared to deliberate. On April 17, 1996, after 3 days of deliberation, the verdict came in. Lyle and Erik Menendez were found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The jury also determined that 2 aggravating circumstances applied: ambush and multiple homicide. These findings narrowed the sentencing options to just 2: life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. Ultimately, the jury chose life without parole, citing the brothers' lack of prior criminal records and any documented history of violent behavior. It was the harshest punishment short of death, and it ensured that Lyle and Erik would never walk free again. Both were initially sent to North Kern State Prison in Delano, where they underwent diagnostic evaluations to determine the conditions of their confinement. Then, on September 10, 1996, the California Department of Corrections made its decision. The brothers would be separated. Lyle was transferred to California Correctional Institution in Tehachapi. Erik was sent north to Folsom State Prison near Sacramento. Both were housed in maximum security conditions. Each kept in isolation. Their attorney, Leslie Abramson, called the separation cruel and unnecessary, arguing it served no purpose but punishment. In 1999, she filed habeas corpus petitions to challenge the terms of their imprisonment. California Supreme Court denied them. The legal battle moved to federal court, but in 2003, the U.S. District Court also rejected the appeal. In 2005, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the decision, closing yet another chapter in the case. During those early years behind bars, Lyle reportedly spent hours on the phone, often calling the manager of his former restaurant. Inmates began to complain about the time he monopolized. Erik kept a lower profile, though he was once caught in an intimate encounter with another inmate, an incident that, according to prison reports, never repeated. Then, after 22 years apart, on April 4, 2018, the Menendez brothers were reunited in the same housing unit. For the first time in over 2 decades, they were allowed to see each other regularly, a moment that brought tears to both, according to those close to the family. But the story wasn't over. Attorneys Mark Geragos and Cliff Gardner, representing the brothers, filed a new habeas corpus petition, this time armed with new evidence. One key item was a letter Erik had written months before the murders, addressed to his cousin Andy Cano. In it, Erik expressed disgust and resentment toward his father, hinting at sexual abuse and noting how Jose's physical presence had become unbearable. They also introduced the testimony of Roy Rosello, a former member of the boy band Menudo, who alleged that he too had been sexually abused by Jose Menendez, potentially reinforcing the brothers' long-standing claims of abuse. Petition was accepted, and in a surprising move, Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon recommended a resentencing hearing, one that could make the brothers eligible for parole after decades behind bars. The announcement set social media ablaze. After Kim Kardashian, known for her advocacy in criminal justice reform, publicly voiced her support. On Instagram, she expressed that the justice system had failed to consider the trauma and long-term psychological effects of abuse on Lyle and Erik. To her and many others, the original trial had overlooked the emotional scars left by Jose Menendez. Today, Lyle is 57 years old, with 35 of those years spent in prison. Erik is 5'4". The reaction to the possibility of their release has been mixed. Some view them as cold-blooded killers who do not deserve freedom. Others see them as tragic figures, shaped by the toxic environment in which they were raised. Young men who cracked under pressure no child should have endured. As it stands, The future of Lyle and Erik Menendez lies once again in the hands of the court. Their family holds out hope, believing that continued imprisonment serves no purpose after more than 3 decades. But the final word has yet to be spoken, and the nation, now more reflective than outraged, waits to see what justice will look like this time.